We will keep allowing the participants to join in. But a warm welcome to everyone to this global evaluation week session webinar organized by the Rocket Learning team. The Rocket Learning team um, recently conducted an early childhood care and education cross-sectional survey. And we are pretty excited to share our learnings, our experiences, the key insights and takeaways from the study that we conducted in Solapur and Chandigarh to reflect rural and urban contexts. So before diving into the presentation itself, I just want to give you an overview of the flow of this webinar. So we will begin with providing you with the context to doing this study, and then moving on to giving you a study overview, walk you through the methodology, giving you a sneak peek on the demographics of the surveyed participants, then diving into the key findings, insights, and concluding the key learnings. So we have 1 hour broadly. So we aim to complete our presentation within the first 45 minutes and open up the floor for discussions towards the last 15 minutes. However, feel free to drop your questions in the chat so that we can refer them back when we open the floor for questions and discussions. So with that context, a brief of myself, I'm Bilal Afroz. I lead the research and M&E team here at Rocket. My background is pretty much in the impact evaluation space. Have been in this space for about more than a decade now. And ECE and ECD research is close to my heart, and that's what brought me to Rocket to explore ECE, ECD space further with cutting edge research. That's a brief of my background, and I am also joined by my colleague who will join me in this present webinar, co-founder of Rocket Learning, Namya. So over to Namya to take us to set the context for this webinar.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Bilal, and thank you all for being here. I know it's an hour out of everyone's time, but we're really looking forward to taking you through these results. So I think for many people on this call, this will not be new, but India is going through a learning crisis, as is much of the developing world. 35 million children in India can't recognize a single letter or a single number by the age of 6. They're clearly at risk of not reaching their developmental milestones. And for most of these children, they will not catch up. In fact, they will continue to fall further and further behind, which is a fundamental inequity. This is driven in a large part by the fact that early childhood development and early childhood education, so broadly, the kind of stimulation and education that a child needs before the age of 6 is not available to most children. In India, there's a massive opportunity because 60% of these children go to Anganwadi centers, which are government-run daycare centers. And there have been several important and significant strides recently to bring education into these centers. However, in the past, they've mostly focused on nutrition. So at Rocket Learning, what we're trying to do is we have a program that supports parents, Anganwadi workers who are the key adults in young children's lives, with high quality content, with communities of practice, and sort of professional development for the Anganwadi workers to support them to become their children's first teachers and most effective teachers. And then lastly, what we do is sort of bring in data. So, we're all aware now what the learning statistics are for young children. But for the youngest children, for children under 6, there's almost no data available on what actually are their developmental outcomes. Are they falling behind or are they on track? If they are, then in which domains is that necessary? And until we have data it's very difficult to drive action. So what we're hoping for today is that we can start a data collection exercise that can sort of, for many of us who work in early childhood, who work in education, who work in policy, we can sort of bring these insights and develop innovative and exciting new programs. We just wanted to bring a few global insights out. There's been attempts at this kind of large-scale research in the past. There was a country profile on early childhood development. UNICEF has led a lot of this that said that there are significant data gaps in areas such as early stimulation at home. What is the level of parental and family support available? What are the resources available at home? And of course, as we all would expect, this is much higher in the global south. So global estimates say that there are 175 million children in the world under 6 today who are at significant risk of not reaching their developmental milestones, right? Which is a big percentage of the young children. Most young children actually are in low and middle income countries, so the crisis is even more important for us to tackle. India, of course, we've discussed. There are 1.4 million, 14 lakh Anganwadi centers that are supporting more than 8 crore children from birth to 6. Significant strides have been taken recently for high quality early learning to reach these centers, early learning and early stimulation. So they've been, recently, earlier this year, there was the release of landmark curriculum both for the children under 3, which is Navchetna, and for in the preschool years 3 to 6, which is Adharshila. So there's an opportunity here to really transform early learning in India. And what we are attempting to do here is our first attempt at measuring baseline levels of child development, right? And the hope is that this can be a continuing exercise conducted by various members of civil society, policymakers, government, to track this progress over time. One thing I leave us with, one of the impetus behind doing this research is that the data and the research in low and middle income countries is so little that there is actually more research on non-human primates, on chimpanzees, gorillas, apes, than there is on children in our countries. And that simply is not a situation that can be allowed to continue. So we need more research, we need more high quality research, and I hope you enjoy what we found.
Yeah, thanks, Namya, for setting that context very well. Leads us into the next session where we deep dive into. So I would start by providing you with the study overview cell. So as Ramya already highlighted and also as indicated by large base of well-researched literature, so investing in the well-being of child in the early years has shown to like provide the long-term returns, right? In this context, we the survey aimed to create comprehensive data set on ECCE to provide insights that could potentially shape policies and programs that specifically focus on supporting learning and development of children under 6 and also their caregivers. So with that, we broadly had 3 objectives. One, to create first of its kind data set wherein we assess the learning and development of kids, but also try to corroborate, understand the relationship with different socioeconomic demographic factors to create, come up with current most actionable data and also bringing awareness to the critical years of this early childhood. So as I briefly touched based upon before, we conducted this cross-sectional survey in 2 districts, Solapur in Maharashtra and Chandigarh. Broadly, our aim was to select 2 districts that can give us both rural and urban picture So Solapur in this case is more rural in nature, and Chandigarh is an urban geography. Um, and we conducted this survey in Jan and Feb of this year. Um, and as far as the tools are concerned, we used Credi, which is a tool by Harvard University for assessing very early kids, 0 to 3.5 years children. And then AIM-ECD, which is a tool created by World Bank for 4 to 6 years child assessment. So we will give you further picture on these tools moving on, but those are the two tools we use. Broadly, we covered about 600 surveys in both the districts and well balanced between boys and girls. So overall, to be precise, we conducted 1194 assessments or surveys. Uh, so as I mentioned before, this is a cross-sectional study. Cross-sectional means that we collected this data only at one point in time. So this is not a pre-post study. This is a cross-sectional just to help us understand what's the picture at that point in time. And we interviewed parents of kids and also directly assessed kids, especially the 4 to 6 year kids. We directly assessed them. And for the very early for the very young kids, 0 to 3.5-year-old, we administer the development and learning module to the parents because we can't directly administer the test directly to this very young kids. However, for the 4 to 6 years old, we administer the development and learning modules directly to the kids themselves. Uh, Broadly, we had three research questions to steer this research. The first research question was to explore the development status of the children under 6 and also to investigate the factors influencing child development status via socioeconomic and also demographic factors. The second research question was to assess the assets, resources, knowledge available in the households to the caregivers, parents, to support development of children under 6. And the third research question focused on assessing the institutional support that's available to the parents to support the development and learning of their children. So those are the three key research questions guiding us for this research. And you will see that all the research findings are aligned to these three high-level research questions. So briefly on the sampling strategy that we employed. So we employed two-stage sample design for this study, which is again in line with other large-scale surveys that are conducted in India. For example, ASER is annual status of education report conducted by Pratham, and also CNSS survey, which is a national level nutrition focused survey. So the sampling strategy is more or less similar and aligns to that. So in the first stage, we selected villages and wards. So villages in Solapur, which is a rural geography, and wards from Chandigarh, which is an urban geo, from census 2011 data. Because 2011 census data is the latest one, so we based our sampling on that. In the second stage, we selected households randomly from the selected villages and wards in the first stage. And broadly, our sampling calculations suggested we require about 600 respondents per district to help us derive district level estimates. And the sample of 600 per district was equally split between the two age groups, 0 to 3.5 and 4 to 6. And when we used a sampling technique called PPS sampling, probability proportional to size, for the sampling of the households. No, sorry, sampling of the villages and wards. So that's a sneak peek into the sampling strategy we employ. And if any one of you is more interested into get into the more technical details, you can reach us bilaterally on this. On the child assessment tools, I mentioned we use Credi for the very young kids, 0 to 3.5. This is a tool created by Harvard University, and this tool assesses four domains: motor, cognitive, language, and socio-emotional domains. And this tool has both a short form and a long form. And CREDI is a well tested tool across the globe in different languages, including Indian languages. And for this survey, we used a long form for assessment of 0 to 3.5-year-old kids. Just a nuance here that officially CREDI is applicable till 0 to 3.3 years only. However, upon consultation with the experts at Harvard who created this tool, they test um, based on their guidance and recommendation. We use this tool till 3.5 years. Just to give you a glimpse of the different types of items or concepts explored in the CREDI tool, you can see here that the items are very well organized for each age category. For example, here, child grasping onto a small object, child crawling, rolling, scooting forward, child kicking a ball, and other objects. And you will see that each question is very targeted to a specific age range, right? So that's how CREDI is defined and developed. On the other hand, we use AIMECD, which is a tool developed by World Bank. This is for 4 to 6 years old kids assessment. Unlike CREDI, which is administered to the caregivers, here AIMECD is directly administered to the kids themselves. So here we have four domains that we explored: early literacy, early numeracy, executive functioning, and socio-emotional development. And AMECD is also very well tested tool globally in different languages. And this also has two versions: a caregiver report, which is a shorter form, and a direct assessment, which is a longer assessment module. And for this study, we use direct assessment tool. Um, And just to give you a glimpse of the different items included in the AIMECD assessment tool. So here is an example of a receptive spatial vocabulary item where we ask about the spatial concepts, and then shape identification related items. So now let's get on to just a brief on the demographics of the surveyed participants. Um, so most of the um, respondents were mothers, and a small proportion, about 6%, also were fathers, primarily because fathers, in most of the cases, they are out of the house for day work, and we managed to interview mothers in most of the cases. And more or less, the proportion is similar in Solapur and also Chandigarh. It's slightly more uh, fathers interviewed in Solapur. And also, the sample is well balanced for male and female across both the districts also. That's a brief of the demographics. Um, on the mother's age, so if you can look at this chart, at the overall level for both Solapur and Chandigarh combined, about 80% of the mother's age was between 21 to 30 years. And if you look closely by district, then Solapur has relatively more younger mothers compared to Chandigarh, which is an urban geo. And in terms of the mother's education, at the overall level, we find around one-third of the mothers were educated class 9th or below. And this proportion was relatively higher in Solapur compared to Chandigarh. And a similar trends in the father's education could be observed, similar to that of mother's education, wherein about one-third of the fathers were educated class 9th or below, this proportion being relatively higher in Solapur compared to Chandigarh. So that's a brief on the demographics of the surveyed participants. Now let's move on to the key findings. So as I mentioned before, we have our first research question that focuses on assessing the development status of the children under 6 and how do different socioeconomic and demographic factors influence the development status. So here, the findings are very specific to the very early kids. We know that 0 to 6 are early kids. However, for the ease of understanding of these concepts, I refer to 0 to 3.5 as very early children, and 4 to 6 as relatively older kids. So here it's specific to 0 to 3.5, where we use CREDI as an assessment tool. And here, after collecting data, we analyzed and we generated the raw scores. So uh, post generating the raw scores, we consulted experts at Harvard University who actually developed this tool, CREDI tool. And one fact which is interesting to bring here, with respect to ECE, ECD domains, is that there is no set global standard available currently that very specifically points out that a child who is above this cutoff is considered developmentally on track or off track, right? So thus such sort of globally aligned cutoffs doesn't exist currently. So based on the recommendations from CREDI creators and also uh, from literature wherein the CREDI was used in other contexts, for example, in Africa, we defined certain cutoffs. So time doesn't allow us to go into the technical details, but broadly we standardized score and we defined those scoring like those kids whose credit score was greater than or equal to -1, Z score is greater than or equal to -1, they were considered to be on track and otherwise off track. So as per this definition, what we find is about 2/3 of the 0 to 3.5 years kids were found to be developmentally on track. And when we look at by domain wise, we see that language and motor domains, kids were relatively more developmentally on track compared to socio-emotional and cognitive domains. And when we look at this difference by rural and urban settings, rural is Solapur and urban is Chandigarh, we do find a clear trend in the overall development scores. So kids from Chandigarh were relatively more developmentally on track, 70% compared to Solapur. And when we look at the difference by the domains, interestingly, we find kids doing well in urban geo, like Chandigarh, in socio-emotional, cognitive, and language domains compared to Solapur. However, interestingly, we don't find any difference in the motor domain by rural and urban geography, thereby indicating that rural urban contexts have least influence on the motor development of kids. However, they do they are they do exert influence on socio-emotional, cognitive, and language development. So that's the key message here. Then we explore the development status by different socioeconomic backgrounds. And as you can see here, the proportion of 0 to 3.5 kids developmentally on track by mothers and fathers education, we see a weak correlation in the scores with the education levels of parents. However, this correlation was not so significant and strong. However, we did find that the development scores of the very early kids, 0 to 3.5 years aged kids, was had a strong correlation with the type of occupation father had. For example, kids whose father were employed in government job or private job and who were self-employed, those kids were relatively more developmentally on track compared to those with daily wage labor, informal workers, and those who engage in farming. And similarly, we also see the a strong correlation by the wealth index of the household, especially in the urban geo. For example, here Chandigarh, and you see that the as the wealth index changes from low, middle, high, the the proportion of kids developmentally on track also increases. However, we did not find any effect of wealth index on development status in Solapur, which is a rural geography. So this does indicate that wealth index strongly plays out in the urban geography compared to sort of a rural geography for very early kids. Um, Similarly, when we see the proportion of children developmentally on track by child gender, we find female kids were relatively more on track compared to male. I think
नाला क्या कमिटी में बेटा
thanks. Yeah, sorry for that, students. So when we explore the development status by child gender for 0 to 3.5 years children, we find that female children were relatively more on track compared to male, and this fact is well corroborated by the global research also. And then when we also find a strong correlation uh, in scores by mother owning a smartphone. That is, if a mother has a smartphone, then the proportion of kids developmentally on track was higher compared to those who did not. Similarly, this is for 4 to 6 years children, wherein we administered the AM ECD tool. And here you can find the overall spread of the actual score of the raw AMECD score. So the overall average score was about 41. Early literacy score for this age group was around 36. Early numeracy was about 53. Executive functioning was about 36. And socio-emotional learning was around 39. Just please recall that this 4 to 6 AMECD tool was directly administered to the kids. So this is a direct assessment score. And like CREDI, which is asked to the parents, the caregiver, right? Similar to that of CREDI for the very young kids, for this relatively older kids, 4 to 6 years, we also consulted experts from World Bank who were on team that developed this tool. And based on the consultation, we defined certain cutoffs again. And similar to CREDI, again, for this age group, 4 to 6, or I would say for 0 to 6 as such, there are no set global standards that really categorize a kid on track or off track on the development trajectory. So we had to consult the experts and also review the literature to get insights into this. And we defined this certain cutoffs based on the standardized score. And based on that cutoff, we again find about 2/3 of the 4 to 6 year kids were developmentally on track. And when we look at the domain-wise score trend, we find that kids were relatively more on track in the early numeracy domain compared to other domains like early literacy, socio-emotional, and executive function. So that's the picture for this relatively older kids, 4 to 6. And when we look at the difference by urban and rural settings, we do find that kids from the urban areas scoring well, or they're being developmentally more more on track compared to kids from rural geography like Solapur. And we do find this difference in scores by early literacy, early numeracy, and executive function. And the dots you see here, the three dots signify that the difference in rural and urban scores are highly significant. Um, Interestingly, you will find that in the socio-emotional domain, however, we don't find any difference, or the trend was slightly opposite, that kids from rural areas were scoring well compared to uh, urban kids. So that's the key takeaway here. And we also looked at the difference in scores by gender of child. And please recall that we did find a difference in the development status by gender in the very early age group, right? 0 to 3.5. However, we don't find such difference in scores by gender in the relatively older group, that is 4 to 6 years here. That signifies again that as the child grows older, the difference in the development scores tend to taper as the child grows older. And also align with the natural expectation, the children who were 5 to 6 years scored higher compared to 4 to 5 years kids, and this difference was significant. And then we also find a strong correlation in the development scores by the mother's education. That is, the higher the mother was educated, the better the chances or likelihood that the kid was developmentally on track. So that's when we look at the mother's education. Similarly, we also see a discerning correlation here by father's education as well. And then in our sample, we had about 650 kids in the 3 to 6 age range. And we asked if they attend preschool. And as you can see across both the districts, well over 90% of them attend preschool. However, interestingly, you will find a strong, I would say, clear divide in the proportion of kids attending ICDS run preschool, that is Anganwadi centers in Sholapur and Chandigarh. So this also indicates a strong preference among the urban parents, especially, to enroll their kids in privately run preschools. And also we find a strong correlation in the probability of child attending a private preschool by the wealth index of the household. That is, the higher the wealth index, the higher the probability that the kid will be attending the privately run preschool. That's on the preschool side. And then when we especially look at the development status by the type of preschool child attends, then we find that children attending private preschools had relatively higher probability of being developmentally on track compared to ICDS attending kids. And also we find a strong correlation by wealth index in Chandigarh. And this effect was not observed in Solapur. If you can see, the scores are more or less not significantly different across the wealth index categories. However, we do find a trend or a strong correlation in the development status by wealth index in Chandigarh. And in this age group as well, we find a strong correlation with the mothers owning smartphone and the child being developmentally on track compared to those mothers who did not have their own smartphones. Then we move on to our next research question, key research question 2. Given the already longer length of this tool, we could not include a very detailed module assessing the parent knowledge, attitude, and practices on ECD, ECE. So we included a very crisp, very targeted set of 10 items or questions to assess the perception and knowledge of parents related to ECD. And then we defined those parents scoring greater than or equal to 70% on this scale, having right knowledge and perception on ECD. So with that framework, we find 0 to 3.5 years parents, so about 50% in Solapur having the right knowledge and perception. And this proportion was slightly more, about 2/3 in Chandigarh. And interestingly, we do find a clear difference in the development score status here by the child, I'm sorry, by the parent having the right knowledge and perception of ECD. That is, the better the knowledge and perception of ECD, the higher the likelihood that the child is developmentally on track. And when we look at the relatively older kids, 4 to 6 years, we find that about 50% in Solapur and almost 3/4 in Chandigarh had the right knowledge and perception of ECD. And this also shows when we look at the development status of kids by this indicator, we do find that kids whose parents had better or right knowledge and perception of ECD, their likelihood of being developmentally on track was higher compared to those who did not. However, you will see that the difference, right, is more for the younger kids compared to relatively older kids. Yeah. We also assess the nutrition status of the children just to study if it positively or negatively impacts the development status of children. And for this, we used a module from Comprehensive National Nutrition Survey, CNSS. And yeah, I'm sorry, from CNSS to measure MDD, which is minimum dietary diversity. MDD, minimum dietary diversity, is defined as a child having at least 4 out of 7 defined food groups the previous day of the survey. So what are those 7 food groups? Those are these 7: dairy products, grains, roots, tubers, eggs, legumes, and nuts, flesh foods, vitamin A rich fruits and vegetables, and other fruits and vegetables. So if a child has at least 4 out of these 7 defined food groups, then a child is considered to have a minimum dietary diversity. However, the point to note here is that this MDD framework, it has been developed for 6 to 23 age months kids, but then we extrapolated and used the same framework for kids about 24 months also for our own survey. So in this context, what we find is that so when we look at the dietary diversity status, minimum dietary diversity for 6 to 36 months old kids, we find about 40% of the children in Solapur had minimum dietary diversity, but this proportion was much higher in Chandigarh, about 70%. And then when we look at the minimum dietary diversity by the wealth index, we find a difference by the wealth index as well. That is, the higher the wealth index, the better the dietary diversity. And then interestingly, we find a very strong correlation in the child having minimum dietary diversity in this age group by father's occupation. So if you see those kids whose father had government job or private job, or they were having a minimum dietary diversity compared to others in this scenario. And finally, when we look at the development status of 6 to 36 months old children by dietary diversity, we do find a strong correlation by minimum dietary diversity and the development scores, especially in the rural area. For example, here in Solapur, the difference is highly significant compared to Chandigarh. So this is for 6 to 36 months old children. And when we look at the same nutritional indicator for 4 to 6 years, we find about half of the kids in this age group in Solapur had minimum dietary diversity compared to almost three-fourths of kids in Chandigarh. And we do find difference in minimum dietary diversity by wealth index in Chandigarh. However, this was not significant in Solapur. Uh, and similar to that of 6 to 36 months, 4 to 6 years kids also had a strong correlation with the type of occupation the father had. And finally, on the development scores also, we find that kids who had minimum dietary diversity, they were more likely to be developmentally on track compared to those who did not across both the districts. That's the overall picture on the nutrition side. I think we are running out of time, so I will just speed up. Sorry for that. On the institutional support, we asked if the child has growth monitoring chart, and yeah, almost three-fourths of the kids in the 0 to 3 age range had growth monitoring chart, both in Solapur and Chandigarh. However, this proportion was lower in Solapur for 4 to 6 years old kids. And we also asked whether the child was weighed last month. So if you can see broadly, younger kids were being weighed more frequently compared to older kids. And we also asked if the child's weight, the frequency of the child's weight was being measured. And if you see here, at least once a month, around 40% in Solapur and in about 1/3 of the cases in Chandigarh weigh at least once a month. And then we asked if after weighing the child, did the Anganwadi also provided any counseling, right? Anganwadi or A&M to the parent. And in about half of the cases in Solapur and about three-fourths in Chandigarh, parents reported that their Anganwadi or A&M did counsel them post weighing the child. That's a sneak peek into the institutional support. We have further, but due to the very limited time we have, we did not go into the other indicators we captured as well. However, I would like to conclude by bringing in the overall picture on this. So far, we presented you the standalone disaggregator or cut influence or the effect of on this development scores. So we brought them all into a model just to assess the relative correlation, which factors are more correlated than the others into on the development outcomes. And for this, we ran multivariate regression on both the child age groups. So here specifically, we are showing for 4 to 6 child outcomes, which is AIM ECD scores. And post the robustness checks on the model, we find 6 confounding factors to have explanatory power. What are those 6 uh, confounding factors? It is child age group, district, mother's education, type of preschool child attends, dietary diversity, and the parents having the right ECD perception and knowledge. So we found that in totality, like when we bring this all together, we find that these 6 factors to have considerable explanatory power to predict outcome. They were strongly correlated with the outcome, that is development outcome score here. It might be hard to go have a look at these hardcore numbers. So we also plotted them graphically here. If you see that children from Chandigarh were scoring higher compared to rural area. Older kids, 61 to 72 months, were scoring higher compared to 49 to 60 months. Kids attending privately run preschool were scoring higher compared to others. Child mother education was highly correlated in this as well. And similarly, if you look at the dietary diversity, we do find a clear difference. So greater than or equal to 4 out of the 7 group indicates minimum dietary diversity, and you will see that trend here. And also by parent ECD knowledge, attitude, and practices. So that's on the 4 to 6 age category. Similarly, for 3 to 5, 0 to 3.5 years, where CREDI is the tool. So the outcome variable is the CREDI overall score. And the factors which we find once we include in the model and testing for robustness is these 5 factors: age of child, child gender, wealth status of household, dietary diversity, and parent knowledge and perception of ECD. However, district was just included as a control factor here. It did not seem to influence any in the overall picture. So just to understand more graphically, you see that the for 0 to 3.5 years old kid, the scores increase as the child gets older. Female kids have the higher probability of being developmentally on track compared to male. Household wealth seem to is strongly correlated with outcome scores for 0 to 3.5 years. And similarly, we also see the parent perception and knowledge of ECD having strong correlation with the scores in this regression model also, and by the dietary diversity the child had. So overall, that's the picture. And yeah, so as I mentioned, the primarily challenge we had here was to come up with the cutoff to define a child to be developmentally on track or off track. And for that, we consulted experts, we reviewed the literature, we reviewed what other researchers who have conducted research using these two tools have done in other other countries. And then we defined these cutoffs. And we are hopeful that these measures and standards that we have defined in the Indian context will help us to set a base to further improvise these cutoffs and help us assess the development and learning trajectories of kids much better with more cutting edge research going on. With that, also we offer to support any interested researchers in the ECD, ECE space who are interested to leverage use these two tools, CREDI and AIM-ECD, in their own research for assessing their own programs. The Rocket Learning research team will be happy to support you in terms of understanding these tools, transferring the resources, and helping you to implement these tools on your own as well. So with that, I would conclude this presentation and open up the floor for any questions you may have. So, yeah.
There are a few questions on chat. Divya had the first one. Divya, would you like to come off mute, or would you like me to read aloud the question?
You can read aloud the question. Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, maybe I could also share. Not sure if I missed anything. I just wanted to say that I saw that the study has done a lot of correlation, like studied a lot of correlation. But one of the key research question also says uses the word influence. So I just wanted to check, did you ensure causation and whether tests around it? I'm not too sure about that. So that was one question. I can also add on the second question. The second question is, like, how were these standards established for children in India, right? Like when we say that there's a developmental standard for age 2, age 3, age 4, how did we establish that standard for a developing country or for India? I'm especially curious to understand that because the tools, or at least one of the tools that we've used seems to be from the West, the CREDI tool from Harvard. So it looks like, I mean, what if the developmental standards are very different for these countries given our context? And so would the data be, like, how conclusive is the data when we use a tool that is not contextualized? So that's just a couple, those are just a couple of questions I had.
Yeah, I think I can come in here, and Namya, feel free to add also. So on your first question, firstly, thanks, Divya, for your questions, quite helpful. Um, yeah, you're right. Here, this is a cross-sectional survey. This is not an impact evaluation. So in no sense we say the findings establish causal relationship. So any indication you might have got in terms of, say, some terminologies being expressing a causal um, wording. I think that's solely for internal reference, but this is a cross-sectional study. Everything that we have shown here are broad trends and correlations to different factors, right? And we don't say um, because it's not an impact evaluation, there is no question of establishing a causal relationship between any variables here. That's one. Second, in terms of how did we establish the standards, I think when I was explaining CREDI and AMECD, I should have also explained that uh, we did adapt these tools, and the researchers who created these tools, right? Some of the items, not all, but say some 10-15% of the items do require contextualization to the local factors or local context. So we did adapt some of those questions to Indian context, but others are the items which are tested, and they have been checked for the psychometric properties across different countries. And this is not a very a tool that is only created for developed countries, right? So the items we have are applicable and well tested for um, all the across the globe. However, as I said, there is a need indeed to adapt some of the items in these tools, and we did that as well. I
Got it.
hope that
Yeah,
answers your question.
yeah, thank you.
Great. And I think we have another question here by Parvinder. Is the educational or occupational background affecting the outcome of geography? Not sure if it is already covered. I think we already covered, but we included and have shown you some slides where the education of mothers and fathers and occupational status were seem to be correlating with the outcomes. I think you are referring to those slides probably. But do you have any specific question, Parvinder? Or this is already clear for you?
Um, I think maybe I missed that, but just want to understand because when I saw this, wherever we see mothers or fathers' education is higher, we see higher outcomes. But not sure if the rural, urban, or this Chandigarh and Solapur is actually making a difference in those outcomes. Because if I have a educated mother in the rural, can we get a higher outcome? I mean that
Yeah, yeah. I think I'm not sure when you joined the session, but initially when we were presenting, we did present the rural-urban disaggregation and also by education and occupation.
Okay.
But you're right. Within the subgroup, for example, education, we did not further present how the Solapur and Chandigarh parents were doing. I think that uh, that's something we have in our detailed report, but for
Okay.
the limited time we had, we could not go into that level of detail. But I think the initial slide does give you a sense of how different contextual geographical factors, along with these sort of disaggregators, education, occupation, also have an interplay, or they combinedly influence the child outcome, right?
Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Pravinder. And we have a question from Jaydeepa. Did the geography urban rural made difference in social emotional outcomes?
I think this is the same. Acha, okay, this is specifically for social emotional. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we had again one slide there. I'm not sure if we can go back there, show you this one, this slide which I presented, and we don't find much difference by social emotional by rural urban. If you can see here, right, the last one, but we do find difference in other domains like LE literacy, numeracy, and executive function.
Thank you,
I hope this answers your
Namya,
question.
thank you so much. One more thing I just wanted to understand. Is it
Yeah.
much important to first educate teachers in terms of SEL and then assist children, or
I think maybe Namya, you can come here.
ask
You have any?
Sorry, Jaideep, we're losing you. Could you repeat that, please?
Yes. Is it audible now?
Yes, but you're still a little soft, so it could be a little louder. That'd be great.
Is it audible now? Hope so. In terms of telling social and emotional development, maybe the younger kids may not be able to express until and unless there is an educator who build that skills in them. So, is it first to educate the teachers and then assess children?
Yeah, I think that's a great hypothesis. It's very hard to, I think, test that using our data. And there was another question about, did we assess Anganwadi workers and ASHA? So that was not part of the scope of this study. But sort of given our work, I think absolutely, I think your instincts are correct that it does, it is relatively less known as a domain amongst educators or amongst parents. As well, right? In terms of its importance. So that is something that I think many of us who are in the early childhood space focus on because that is important. What we thought was that it is important to develop this kind of baseline because, again, it's very hard to design an implementation when we don't necessarily know, what is the current situation. So thank you for the question and the idea, and I hope that in your work and for many people on this call, your work will sort of help move these outcomes in the ways that we all want to.
Thank you, Namya. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Deepa. I think one question from Parvinder again was, did we try to capture effects of ANM's, ASHA's proactiveness motivation towards ECCE? Not very specifically, because we did not interview ANMs and ASHAs as a part of this, because this was only with caregivers and kids. However, we did have some proxy indicators on the institutional support the parents were getting, right? And I just showed you a couple of them, but we did not specifically explore this concept. And Krishna Kejriwal is asking what database was used for sampling households. We initially covered when we were starting this. So we leveraged Census 2011 data to sample the villages and wards, villages in Solapur and wards in Chandigarh. And then after the stage 1 sampling of villages and wards, we randomly selected households. And this methodology is similar to that of what's followed in ASER and also CNSS kind of large-scale surveys. That's the standard. We aligned our sampling strategy to that. I hope that answers your question, Krishna.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Rekha is asking, how should we understand the findings about smartphones, especially when mother's education did not make a difference in the birth to 3.5? On what basis were the districts identified? Okay, so as I said, it's a standalone correlation we observe, right? And when we brought everything together into a very rigorous regression model, this was not coming to be very significant, I would say, significantly correlated factor, right? Because others had significantly more, they were significantly more strongly correlated. So this has to be looked into the program's perspective, but Namya, anything that you think here, especially on this smartphone thing?
Yeah, I think one possible pathway is that mothers with access to smartphones, even if their education levels are not very different, might have either different levels of autonomy within the household, and I think that's something that has also been seen in in educational research, to affect child outcomes. It might also just reflect a different degree of access to knowledge, right, and exposure to education. So again, there are a few different pathways. It's difficult to parse exactly what's happening through this data, but we thought it was an interesting uh, correlation that is worth going into further. I think every one of our correlations can be a paper in itself, and we hope that some of you will pick up those threads.
Yeah, thanks, Namya. And also, what basis the districts were identified? So it's more so, so our, okay, so Rocket Learning's near term, or I would say medium term, aim is to roll out this ECCE cross-sectional survey across the nation. So we were planning to just start this with 2 districts reflecting rural-urban context broadly. So that's how we selected from our own experience these 2 districts. But we plan to gradually scale this survey in the years coming, so that we can ultimately um, roll out the survey across the nation. So that's a broad plan. I think Purvi is asking, okay, I think that's still coming. Thanks for that, Purvi. Then once you mentioned father's occupation having impact on local language. Was there any specific domain that showed difference? Also, is there a finding talking about any kind of father engagement with kid? Yeah. So I think the father's occupation, um, mostly we discussed about the strong correlation with the nutrition status, right? Minimum dietary diversity. So um, I'm not sure I have to go back, but did we discuss something on false occupation? I think we did not specifically highlight any of the development outcome scores by father's occupation, but yeah. Sorry, this is the one. But then we did not specifically plot any chart by father's occupation by domain. So I'm not sure what the question here is. But broadly, we find father's occupation is strongly correlated with the minimum dietary diversity, as you can see here in these 2 charts, right? Okay, I think we are also slightly over time. Apologies for that. And then Rekha is asking the description of private school. Otherwise, yeah, I think that's a suggestion. No, thanks for that. Got it.
Yeah, I know. I think these are all.
Yeah,
I think we've covered many of the questions,
mostly.
and more of them will be covered. When you sort of read through the detailed report as well. So again, thank you everybody for coming, for participating so strongly, for listening. I think many of us on this call will agree that early childhood education is one of the most important issues of our times, given the scale of brain development that happens at this age. We can't afford inaction, right? In the country that has almost half of of the world's young children, we can't afford to inaction. So we're so excited to release this report. Please go through it. It has much more detailed data, insights. Give us your feedback, and we're excited to take this to sort of the next level in the years to come.
Yeah, thanks, Namya. I think one of the questions is Is studied in public domain? Not yet, Rekha. We are planning to bring this to the public domain soon, and we'll also mention a specific criteria to quote the reference there within the report. Yeah, thanks much for asking. Great. Thanks, everybody, for taking your time for this session, and we hope the key findings and the learnings here you found it useful. Feel free to reach out to the rocket training team if you are interested to explore any specific finding further. We'll be happy to assist. Thank you very much.
Have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Done. We'll stop the recording.
Sure, Apurva.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great
Thanks.
one,
Thanks,
Bilal.
Apurva.
Good
Thanks,
job. Shalo.
Sashita. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Shweta.
Thank you.
Thanks all for the support. Look forward to the recording. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.